I think Sherry, we can turn it over to the chair of the town council. And we can start.
Okay, Mike, you're up.
Okay, thank you, folks. Welcome. I'm calling to order the annual tri-board meeting of Town Council, School Committee, and the Finance Committee on October 28th, 2024 at 6:01 p.m. by Zoom. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And thank you, let me get this right off the bat, for all the hours that you all put in doing what you do relative to running the town financially. Very much appreciated. I would ask everyone to stand as you're able and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. I'm going to dispense with introductions because I think we all know who we are and we are here. Item 4, the chair comments. I'll be very brief. We've had a lot going on at town council, as we always do. 2 items that I consider to be major we'll see on the town meeting warrant. One is the subcommittee represented by myself and councilors Vincent and Dabrowski have come up with our senior planner and town administrator with what we hope is a compromise plan where we'll hopefully pass that at the town meeting. I understand there are strong feelings from all sides on it, but we've done the best we can to come up with a compromise plan, which we hope will allow us to comply with MBTA or the MBTA communities General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 3A. The other item I'll just mention briefly is the solar project at Galvin. Somewhat time sensitive in the sense that if a roof gets too old, and one can define that a little bit differently, but certainly at 10, 11 years, we are getting to the point where either we do it or we don't. We think we put together a very good RFP. We think with the IRA 30% and with various contributions, we think that it's a very, very good project and it should pay for itself approximately within 4 years. All these things are based on estimates, but you know, these are estimates that are well known based on the cost that we know we're going to incur if we pass this and the cost that we should be able to obtain the contributions and reimbursements from, fortunately for us, other places. So I'm going to leave it there for chair comments. And I believe, Steve, the next item up on 4B of our agenda would be the comments from the chair of the school committee. Is Stephen Ingalls on tonight?
He is.
I am, Michael, and thank you. I appreciate that. Good evening. First and foremost, I'd like to extend our gratitude to WCAT and the town's professional staff for facilitating our meeting. As chair of the school committee, I'm honored to take part in the process, along with my committee colleagues, our town council, and the finance committee. We're all here tonight. We, the members of the school committee, along with the administration, teachers, and staff, are deeply committed to providing high-quality instruction for our students and their families. Our collective efforts are vital in shaping the educational landscape of our community, and we recognize the invaluable support from all town departments that contribute to the success and efficiency of our schools, including our police, fire, health and human services, and our public works. I'm pleased to announce that in the spring of this year, we reached a successful contract agreement with our dedicated teachers. And in that, I would especially like to thank our town administrator who participated in our final day of negotiations to settle that contract. This achievement underscores our commitment to supporting and valuing our educators, who play an essential role in shaping the futures of our students. We also recognize that the continuing hard work of educating a student population continues through the challenges brought on by COVID. Our educators, students, and families are navigating new realities, and it's imperative that we provide the necessary resources and supports to ensure that they all have access to the educational environment that meets their individual needs and interests. This will guide our work this year to settle 6 new contracts with the administrative principals, the assistant principals, directors, paraeducators, our food service workers, clerical, traffic supervisors, and our custodians. We've begun to see steel going up at the new site of the new Wakefield Memorial High School. And we believe that this will not only be a great facility in which to educate our students, but will also be a home for numerous community events like the current Galvin Middle School. Again and again, we are humbled by the support that Wakefield shows for its educational community and how much faith they place in its ability to contribute towards the vibrancy of Wakefield, where we can all reap the benefits of a well-educated student base, as well as the amazing families that it attracts. Tonight's tri-board meeting is a crucial step as we prepare for the upcoming town meeting and the fiscal year 26 budget season. It's an opportunity to engage in meaningful discussions about the wide spectrum of opportunities and challenges that lay ahead of our town and for our schools. By working together, we can better understand and address the needs of our community, ensuring that we are well prepared for the decisions that will shape our future. In this process, it's imperative that we remain active listeners to fully concentrate, understand, and respond thoroughly through our budget discussions. Trusting the specialized knowledge and insights of our school administrators, including our business manager, our food service director, and our facility director, is essential as they provide critical guidance that will help us make well-informed decisions. I appreciate that you included us here tonight in this meeting, in this process, and I look forward to a productive and collaborative discussion. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair Ingles. Do we have the Chair of the Finance Committee, James Sullivan, on tonight?
We do.
Yes, hello, good evening. Just briefly, we appreciate this meeting from the Finance Committee, the group of the Finance Committee. It helps kick things off. It helps bring all of us together at the beginning of the year to prepare for a new budget going into the next fiscal year. The committee appreciates the forecasting, the budgeting, and then the allocation of the funds through all the departments. Everybody has priorities, everybody has desires, and our group is sort of charged with helping review that and make recommendations to the rest of the body that's sort of here tonight at the town council and obviously to town meeting. So we have great participation from our board, and we again look forward to kicking off this season and rolling into the process. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. I believe our next item, I personally think the town is in good financial condition, but now we'll find out for sure because we have the financial condition of the town. And I believe Town Administrator Dan Sherman is going to be presenting.
Oh, did Dan get a promotion or a demotion? Town Administrator Dan Sherman?
No, I said Town Administrator. I believe that Dan Sherman.
Oh, you believe that? Okay.
Presenting. I
Yes.
believe that.
You know, Steve, you can keep that job.
No, yeah, we will roll over to Dan Sherman. Dan is a volunteer member of the Finance Committee for many years. We spend a lot of time talking together about forecasting and trends, and sometimes we talk a little bit about skiing and things like that, but we probably spend a lot of time talking about what's going on. And Dan's going to kind of give us a little historic perspective, and we'll be jumping back in and where we go and what's happening. So Dan, go ahead.
All right.
Please.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. So the first slide up, Sherry, thank you, shows our local receipts. And one of the things about local receipts is that you've seen a lot of growth since 2000. And it's really driven, obviously the biggest nut is the motor vehicle excise tax. And you can see that's been a pretty steady increase. The other excise taxes kicked in 2011. You'll see that changed because of the hotel and meals tax increase. We got that picked up. The next few items going up the slides didn't change too much until you get to licenses and permits, which is that light blue near the top. We had a big increase in the number over the last few years, and as everybody knows, there's a lot of building going on here in town, and so that really kicked off in 24 with huge increases. And then finally, the investment income, which is the yellow, that increased because our assets that we have in the bank is all fixed income. And as everybody knows, interest rates have climbed significantly in the last year and a half or 2 years. And so we got a big increase there. And so all in, we're close to about $11 million in local receipts, much higher than even I expected. I'm much more optimistic about the local receipts. I look at the trend line than Kevin is, because Kevin is stuck with the DOR rules and regulations, so he can't be very optimistic. But we did have an excellent year of around $11 million in local receipts. And later on this evening, we'll be talking about what we expect for 25 and beyond. Sherry, next slide. So next slide is on our state aid. And one of the things about state aid is it actually finally has moved above where it used to be. We had a dip there in 2011, 2012. We're up to almost $14 million, and we expect that we'll hit about 14. Over that 25-year period, the increases has been around 4% per year, but obviously there's some blips and some downtime between 2002, 2012, where we had to do a lot of belt tightening because of that lack of aid coming from the state. Next slide. So next we have our stabilization fund, and the balance has increased to just about $3.4 million. As a percentage of budget, it's at roughly at 3%. As you can see, back in the day, it was much higher than that in 99, 2000 frame, but we spent some of that money, spent it down to about $1 million in 2007, and it's been creeping up ever since. Important thing about the stabilization fund, that percentage of the solid line is showing at 3%. Our goal and finance committee and town selectmen before they became town council and now town council, we're trying to maintain at least a 10% reserve in between free cash and the stabilization fund. So this 3% will be added to our free cash. We'll look to see how we're doing on our reserves. We like 10%. Steve alerted me that one of the rating agencies or the auditors came in and said, we like 15% better. I disagree with that. I like the 3% or 10% total, and it'd be nice to stick with that. That's be my preference anyway. Next up is free cash. So because of the very large local receipts above expectation, our free cash went up quite a bit at the end of fiscal year 24. We also got quite a bit of money back from various budgets, more than expected. I maintain about $500,000 in expected returns from the various departments. We got quite a bit more than that, especially in healthcare. So that free cash between the local receipts and the budget's coming in the actual is coming much less than budget. We had a big jump to somewhere around 12, I think it was 11.8 on free cash, and roughly 10% of our total budget. So combining the stabilization 3% plus this 10, we're now at about 13% of our budget, which is a great spot to be. But as we're going to talk later on, we're going to be spending some of that money here in the fall town meeting and dropping that level down closer to the 10. Next slide. So on debt service fund, it's been creeping up quite a bit, all the way up to 1.2 million. But now we've been spending some of that for construction projects around the town. So we have about $1 million in the debt service fund. It hasn't been the same. This is John McCarthy really wanted to make something go with this, but we still have about $1 million there to be used for capital projects as we see fit. Next slide, please. Our capital expenditures. To me, the most important on the capital expenditures is the upper lines, the light blue and and dark blue, where the capital plus bonds. So this is what we're actually spending to keep our buildings and so forth going, and our equipment, our cars, trucks, snowplows, all of that capital stuff. And we're spending about just over $5 million a year on that. But as a total capital spend as a percentage of our budget, it's actually dropped down to about 5%. And I've read different things about where's the right spot to be on capital. Most that I've read said we should be higher than 5% on our capital spend. So I'd like to see that move up a bit to creep up to say 6 or 7%. I think that'd be a better spot for us to be, and that's where that's the spot that we used to be back in 2003, 2004. It'd be good to get back there, and but we'll see what happens when the high school hits this graph. We may achieve that without any difficulty. Next slide, please. So we have an overlay account. This is an account that's used in case people come forward and asking for an abatement on their real estate taxes. And Victor's done a great job. This fund is really small as a percentage of budget, 1.5%. The balance has got quite large. We're looking to move some of that money. I think in 25 we're moving. Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we got $500,000 out of that account into the general account.
I think that would be our plan towards the end of the year, yes.
Yeah. So we'll draw that down a little bit because it is getting a little bit large. And I believe that is what I have to the moment. And I think I'm turning it back over to Steve at this point. So thank you.
I think Jim Sullivan is going to talk about the next couple of slides, and then I'm going to jump in right after him. So Jim,
Okay.
these are yours.
Very good, thanks. Thanks, Dan. Fine job as always. So the budget process, you can see the slide, but it's this time of year that department heads and the Steve, the administrator, start talking to people and looking at the possible needs for the year. School officials and school committees start talking about their looking forward as the bullets speak to trying to level fund everything but contractual obligations, trying to link projects to budget priorities and needs. The subcommittees are those of the finance committee. We break out into smaller groups and work with department heads, work with the school committee and the school officials to review the budget, kind of end-to-end line item budget review. Towards the end, into January, we start working to make presentations. The department heads present to town council, present to finance committee, with Steve and the school department, with school committee personnel present to the finance committee, and eventually go to town council. And it all leads up to being prepared for the presentation to the Springtown meeting and bringing it to the body itself. So we have a 15-member board. We have great attendance for our board over the last few years, our committee. Both I appreciate that. I know Steve appreciates that. The attendance is good. The subcommittee folks, they try to work hard, all volunteers, all appointed, care about the community, and try to work to meet as many needs as we can, balancing the finances against desires and priorities. So, next slide. This speaks to much of the same thing, just speaking at it from a calendar basis. We did have a forecasting committee, a subcommittee meeting. That's a group from the finance committee, along with Steve Mayo, where we review the end of the year activity. We forecast ahead, looking at various factors, and come up with what we think is a forecast for us, for the department heads and for the finance committee and for others to work off of. We begin, finance committee kicks off our meetings. We have a meeting next week where we'll review in detail kind of last year's activities and the results of the forecasting, look at year over year potential expenses and increases. And again, in October, kicking off this meeting. November, again, I spoke about the department heads. And then the subcommittees in the finance committee, as well as town council and department heads, start presenting in earnest after the first of the year, rolling right up into April, leading into town meeting at the spring town meeting where the full budget is spoke about, the full budget has been vetted out and discussed on the floor. So that's the background of us on the finance committee with the help of many other people on this call. So, thank you.
Great. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here we are. Really, the November town meeting kind of balances out how we are paying for the fiscal year we're currently in. You know, it's when we put our budgets together in you know, April, May, and June, we kind of have an idea about what the tax levy is going to be. We have some thoughts on new growth, new construction. We have some thoughts on local receipts, and we have some thoughts on state aid, but oftentimes we don't know until after we've set our budget, particularly because the state hasn't really been great about passing its budget until we're into our fiscal year. So, but we go by experience, and that's why these forecasting meetings and these tri-board meetings are so important. So Dan opened up the meeting talking about revenue projections. And these local receipts, we've really done very well on local street receipts, and I'm going to drill down to them a little bit more. And every year, Kevin and I move up what we are predicting for local receipts as we present to the Department of Revenue. We have a very conservative viewpoint with the Department of Revenue because that's what they'd like, and they're the ones who are going to approve our tax rates. So while you know, Dan has been looking at, and rightly so, you know, local receipts of over $11 million. We're using we're using 8. Last year we used 7.5 million. We make that up with free cash, so at the end of the year it all washes out if things go well. But I think we know that the state would like us to be very conservative and slowly moving that number forward as we go forward. New growth is new construction. Remember, we are we base our taxes on next year, you know, at 2.5% plus new growth or new construction. We had a great new construction that finally came in last fiscal year. The power line was great because it had no kids in school. It didn't tax our police or fire department at all. Didn't have really any cars on the roads after it all got up and running. But we don't get that all the time. So new growth, we're relying on new construction, and you can see some of these projects going around town. I, for one, am happy, I guess, that new growth was a little bit more than $1 million. I would have liked it to have been more. And I know that Kevin and I both would have liked it to have been more. And really, that's based upon a little bit of a delay in some of the construction from which was approved. And so we met with our assessor, Victor, who does a great job and kind of, map those out for the big projects for the next 3 years and what we see when we'll capture all of it. So that looks very good, and we should have consistent new growth of $1 million plus over the next 2 or 3 years. I'll tell you, some of the communities around us, they tell me they've got 200,000 in new growth, 300,000. That would be really tough for us to give the services, as that's what we came in on. Position ourselves for the long term. We are very careful to look at how we're going to be 5 years, 10 years down the road. It's something that bond surveillance agencies really like. We have a forecast, thank you, Dan Sherman, again, that we spend some time going on, and we look good for the long term here, as long as we stay vigilant and follow what we should be following, follow our mantra here. Increase capital expenditures. We try to increase those every year. That's a hard one, but it's very important because if you don't have a good fleet program, if you don't have a good maintenance program, if you don't, replace roofs on a timely basis, even computers and things like that, you end up spending a lot more in the long run. So we've tried to be very good about moving that up a little bit every year, and I am partial to the 5% of our budget there. If things are really good, I could be convinced to go a little higher, but 5 is pretty good. Prudent maintenance of reserves. I always thought that 10% of reserves was great. And I was very proud. It took us a long time to get to 10% of reserves all in and fund OPEB and fund our pension. I think we're one of the few that do that for a community our size. This year, I heard higher numbers, 13 to 15%. I think that was more because we were borrowing, 200 million for a new school, but it is something we want to look forward at, and we want to make sure that we maintain that AAA bond rating, because it creates a real benefit for the taxpayer. I asked our bond counsel to run the rates and what they would mean, because we just went out for the first half of this and we came up with a rate of 3.6% for $100 million at a AAA. If we had even, gone to a one notch down to a double A, that would have probably meant about a 3 million more in interest on that first borrowing for the taxpayer, and that's a direct benefit to the taxpayer. So if we were to keep this 3.6% over the next for the next borrowing, we're going to show a incredible savings on what we projected when we went out to the community, of close to $100 million over the life of that 30 years of the loan. So I, for one, will fight very hard to keep that AAA bond rating, get the lowest rate for the high school, and move forward. Part of this is really carefully looking at our revenue coming in and using free cash to balance. So if I'm at 8 and Dan Sherman's forecast shows 10.5 on local receipts, so I've got to make up that money. So we're going to use or recommend that we use 3.8 million on free cash to balance, and we use that money there and use some money for some other items at the fall town meeting. We're going to end up at 10% of reserves at the end of the day, better than we were last year at this time. So I feel very, very comfortable in balancing the fiscal year 25 budget, which we're a third of the way into. Next page, please, Sherry. So how are we going to balance this budget? Real estate taxes, 90.9 million. That's a given. Local receipts, as I said, Kevin and I are at 8. The finance committee uses 10.5 in their forecast. I'll tell you, last year for local receipts, which was a banner year, we ended up well over $11 million. So I think that we're going to be in very good shape at the end of this fiscal year. Municipal gas and light department is a payment in lieu of taxes program, $974,000. State aid, this is the gross state aid at 3.8 million. New growth at 1.1 million, and I think we'll see that number going around. I think earlier in the year we were hoping for a little bit about 1.5, but some timing came in on that. That was a little bit lower. Available funds, which are bus fees and cemetery sales of cemetery lots and things like that, 283,000, and for a total of 115 million. Next slide, please. So I want to go over those anticipated local receipts for fiscal year 24. We had used 7.5. It came in at 11 million. I'll tell you, 1 million of that was for the building permit fee for 200 Corner Powell. We're not going to get that fee again, but we do seem to exceed local receipts consistently because there is building going on. There's a lot of hotel and meals tax going on. So I call it the Wakefield positive factor of 3.5 million. That's been very good over the last few years. Next slide, please. State aid for 25. Unrestricted local aid was 4.1 million. Chapter 70 was 8.9 million. Charter school reimbursement was 463,000. That's a bugaboo of mine. I'm kind of upset that we don't get more on that. Another areas, which may be veterans and things like that, $332,000. Next slide, please. So I always have said over the years that when we get our state aid, you know, there's the page one that comes in. They call it cherry sheet because years ago it actually came in the mail and it was on red paper, which I always thought was kind of funny. It should have been on green because it was money that we're getting, but they called it the cherry sheet because of the red paper. And you always had to turn it over to see, you know, what was being deducted from your state aid. So under the fiscal year 25 final budget, MBTA cost for having the railway through Wakefield was about $675,000. Charter school tuition, this is sending, this is money that follows kids to go to charter schools, was $1.7 million. Some other areas were about 169,000. So the total final budget, you know, although they gave us 13.8, the state taketh away about $2.5 million. Next slide, please. So I started thinking the last few years about what is our net increase in state aid? Because in balancing, balancing the budget, I really think, you know, when you add up the page, look at page one of the cherry sheet and page two, to me, it's a net that matters. So between fiscal year 23 and 22, the net was about $1 million. That was a big bump that we got a couple of years ago. Last year, between fiscal 23 and 24, net aid increased by 6.4% or $655,000. This year, fiscal 25, between fiscal 25 and fiscal 24, net state aid was $391,000 increase or 3.5%. This is something that I'm going to be talking to with our state delegation about, because I really think that this is an area where we need to get a little bit more bang from the state, a little bit more money in to keep that graph, that line going in the right direction. And that is money that we really need to provide a lot of programs, whether it's the schools, whether it's, you know, police, fire, and everything. That's an important part, and it seems to be going in the wrong direction last few years in my estimation. Next slide, please. So what do we look at when we look this budget factors? Look at the state of the state and what's going on at the state level. I'll tell you that while state revenues through the first quarter of this fiscal year are above last year, they're not quite where I think they want it to be and projected. So hopefully they'll catch up a little bit. It's close, but we'd like to see those state levels really increase. The union contracts, although we're in negotiations for some right now, I believe, I know all are settled on the municipal side. Well, once we get through town meeting, they will be. Doug, is everybody settled now and you're just looking for years gone out, or are some of them not settled for this fiscal year?
So teachers are settled, and we will be negotiating in a normal cycle with 6 bargaining units with everybody but the teachers, Steve.
Okay, so everyone's in the normal cycle right now, which is great.
Correct.
Because it's when you look back and you're doing a retro for a year, that's a lot of money to come up with some of these larger unions. So that's very good and very positive that these are all settled, and that's what I thought. Local receipts this year look very good. Meals tax, hotel tax, and excise tax are all are moving along well, and actually building permits are looking good as well. Last year at this point in time, building permits had brought in 155,000, but only takes one of those big ones to bump them up. So I'm fairly optimistic on our local receipts. They look very good this year. And I would suggest that if more of us eat out in Wakefield, that would help the meals tax. So don't go over the border. Try to eat in town. And but these actually look very, very, very good at this point in time. I mean, last year for a local options meals tax, we collected 455,000. So, you know, if you multiply that by 4, we're ahead of the game there. Hotel tax, last year we collected 600,000. So that might be that's right in there too. If you multiply that by 4, we're over that. And excise taxes, well, that's pretty early on in the cycle. Most of those comes later on. And building permits, last year was a banner year, but if we multiplied 255 by 4, Kevin and I would be very happy going into next fiscal year. So I think my message is that we look like we're holding serve, but we have to be vigilant. And we have to watch the expenditure sides as well. But I think that after this town meeting, after this town meeting will be very good. And we'll keep looking forward to a great rounding out this year very well. I'm going to turn this over, I think, to the superintendent to talk about the schools a little bit.
Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate it. I'm just going to do an introduction, and Christine is going to pick up the first 3 slides. We have about 9 slides total to share. Thank you, Dan, for your kind of analysis. I appreciate it, and Jim as well. Appreciate it. And Steve, your comments are really important. You know, I think that you're spot on. I do think that we need desperately to work with our legislators to get more state aid to better support special education services and support for a number of our subgroups, our student subgroups, because they have been disproportionately impacted. And they're also our subgroups, some of which are growing at really high rates in Wakefield, and their need is increasing kind of proportionally as well. And so at this point, I could turn it over to Christine.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us and having this opportunity as we officially kick off budget time. I know it's my favorite time of the year as well. I know there's always a conversation about, $52 million. We're the largest town department in Wakefield, but there's always this question about, well, what are you spending your money on? So as you can see, just over 80% of this budget is a personnel budget. So you can see from 24 to 25, we're growing just over $44 million with settling the teacher contract. We were able to keep the other 2 lines relatively flat, thanks to some grant funding and some revolving account expenditures, which we'll talk about in a minute. Next slide, please. The next slide talks about what it costs to run Wakefield Public Schools versus where the actual funding is coming from. So from 21 to 25, we are running from 43 million to right now $52 million. And as you can see, the town appropriation, which we're so thankful for, has been growing at just about 5%, but we've had to supplement those budgets from one-time funding. So from 21, 22, and 23, we were fortunate to receive one-time ARPA money in order to help fund those one-time expenditures. But now, ARPA funds, as you know, from September 2024 has expired. So we've had to supplement that now by looking at our revolving accounts. We've done the deep dive. As you can see in the budget document, we've done a projection for the next 5 years of what those revolving accounts are going to be able to afford. They have to go back, as you know, into those accounts that generated that funding. So where we balanced 24 with $200,000 of revolving accounts, and this year we're going to balance 25, fiscal 25, with just over $325,000 of revolving account. So we know that's not sustainable for the long haul, but we're just calling attention to it that our expenditures are growing at a rate that is slightly higher than the town appropriation. Next slide, please. So how are we able to fund all of our successful programs? Number 1 is grants. As you can see, these are the grants that total about $2 million. Our Summer Acceleration Academy, which is very successful. We want to maintain even if that grant is not funded. We have the state grants from Title I to Title IV, which is just about $182,000. And our largest grant is our federal special education IDEA grant. And that grant is $1 million, just over $1 million. And that supports 32 paraprofessionals in our district, which is very important because those staff support our most vulnerable populations. Also our macro program is our state funded grant for that program. And then we received a 3-year Cummings grant for student support programs for guidance counselors and support services because we're still dealing with some of the effects, long lasting effects of COVID for some of our populations. So in order to maintain these programs, we needed to make sure that these grants are continuously applied for and received. Next slide.
Actually, Christine, do you mind if we just go back to the grant slide for a moment?
Mhm.
So just to share with the boards, something that's important here is that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed is sharing with local districts that grants may not be available to certain districts who do not have the MBTA overlay work up to date. And so that's something that we are working on now. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Steve.
Yes, that's language we've been seeing in DESI grants. And I think, I know that the school department, and talking with Doug, probably gets, each year tries to get about 200 grand in DESI, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education grants. Luckily, I think most of these are federal, so aren't affected there, but that is going to be a consideration going forward.
Absolutely. I think we've had grant support for our curriculum work and our Summer Acceleration Academy, which we use to bring in our kindergartners early, which has been a remarkably successful program, is also kind of a DESI grant, which we're looking very closely at as well. So thank you for that. Next slide, please. You all set, Christine?
I am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So when we start to look at 25, 26, we discuss needs and challenges. We are really having a difficult time filling a number of positions. We have application shortages and viable application or applicant shortages in a number of different areas, especially in the area of special education for our teaching corps and for our paraeducators. We also have difficulty hiring for food service and our traffic supervisors right now. And so that's something that we are looking very closely at in terms of moving forward and thinking about. We're also looking at negotiating 6 bargaining units this year. And as Steve pointed out, when we met in the spring with our bond council to kind of hear, one of the things that they reported kind of that is favorable for the town is that the teacher contract was settled. And I think that they were pleased to hear from both Steve and I collectively that how closely the schools work with the town and with FinCom and kind of working through the budget process. So as we are looking ahead, one of the cost drivers, as Christine mentioned this on her first slide, really the 2 drivers for us are going to be paying for labor and kind of absorbing the increased special education costs. And so we always try to build in-district programming to adapt to student needs to keep students in district. But we are kind of looking at kind of an increase in needs for some students to go out of district. And that's for a number of different reasons. Some students and families have moved in that have had needs that we've had to work with them. But also there's a number of pass-through costs that are really just going up disproportionately. And so costs for transportation for special education students that are going out of district, along with additional staffing to support students, something that we're seeing more and more that is a new phenomena, which is, our special education placements will say, for example, we'll have a student that has a need and they will charge us with a pass-through cost for certain personnel to support students. And that's something that is new to us, but it is kind of increased our costs for out-of-district placements really disproportionately. And that's something we're going to need to look at and work through very closely, both with our finance subcommittee and our FinCom liaisons, just to keep everybody up to date for those costs. And so we are increasingly looking for grants and new state funding opportunities. Steve spoke about this. I support kind of talking or working with our legislators. We need an increase in Chapter 70. We also need an increase in circuit breaker. And we are kind of well into the new construction of the new high school. But we're also looking at not only the high school, we're also looking at district space needs and our enrollment. Right now, our pre-K numbers, we've turned away 60 families this year from preschool, from the Doyle. We're kind of busting at the seams there. We have 2 additional classrooms online in Woodville for pre-K students. But having space available in that school is getting increasingly difficult because our K numbers have also gone up. So we're looking very closely at, development in town and kind of how that's translating into kind of squeezing us. We're also looking ahead to where we are currently. We're in a construction project with the new high school, but we're thinking about 10 years ahead now. If it's taken us 10 years to get to where we are now, we're looking at what might the town need and what do we need to do to get there. Next slide, please. So when we look at knowns and unknowns, this is something we discuss regularly. We talked about hiring and personnel shortages. It's a very difficult situation. We talked about special education needs, out of district tuition increases. We've also had an increase in our English language learners, now referred to as multilingual learners, MLs. So just for context, 10 years ago, our EL students made up about 0.8% of our student population. Today, they make up over 4% of our population. If you're just round numbers, 10 years ago, we had about 20 students with English language learner needs. Now we're looking at about 130, 132 and rising steadily. So that's something that is critically important because as students have, if their home language is not English, they are entitled to services in school that we need to provide. So we cover some of this in unknowns. We talked about out-of-district placements, service provider costs, multilingual learner needs. State support is really something that needs to improve. And we're going to be working with kind of both Steve and our finance subcommittee on that. We're also looking at our food service program. And so as the cost for meals have been picked up by the state, this is a wonderful benefit and it has helped students and families, but it has increased the number of meals that we're serving by about 30%. But our staff numbers have not increased. If you just think about that in context, right? If we're serving 30%, and there's been an increase in the number of meals that we're serving by 30%, but our staff has not increased. And that's something that is a real challenge for us. Christine, do you want to add anything here?
No, I think that this is going to become, well, actually, yes, I do want to add, but these are that program is also one of our hard to fill for positions. As Doug was saying, that participation has risen. They're working harder than ever, but unfortunately we can't fill those roles. We're looking to hire more full-time staff to that roles, but also we've been talking to the town about maybe possibly hiring staff that are more than a 0.5. So possibly offering benefits, probably also offering benefits to those staff might entice cafeteria workers to apply for those jobs. So those are the conversations we're having. But we have for the past 2 years funded all benefits from the nutrition services revolving account. So this is the 3rd year of that program being totally and completely self-sustaining and self-funding. So all of the revenues that are driven by and created by that program are going back into that program. But that's where we are with that.
Thank you, Christine. Next slide, please. So we've taken guidance from our finance subcommittee and FinCom. We've tried to be very transparent in terms of what our challenges are and how we can best support projects that the town is working on as well. We want to be good partners, and we know the town has really supported the schools, and we're grateful for that. It's not missed on us for a second. As we work with and collaborate with superintendents, as I meet with superintendents from around the North Shore, I'm grateful to have the team around me and around our group to help us. But our FinCom and our relationship with FinCom, we're looking at one of our goals this year is really being more prepared for town meeting and going into town meeting with a more comprehensive plan to talk about forecasting year over year and how we're going to work collaboratively to both support labor and the challenges in the school system. Christine, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just want to add that there's been a lot of conversation about Wakefield Public Schools special revenue funds, right? We've been talking about where every dollar is coming into the district and how it's being spent. So that's why we created a document last year, and we're even looking to refine it this year to explain where all special revenue funds are being allocated. We've done a 3-year of actuals, and now we're into our 2nd year of proposed budgets, looking back on those actuals and being thoughtful of how to spend down those, but not in 1 year, but over the next couple of years in order to sustain the programs that we've built. And that's important because Doug and I, when we've met with principals and department heads for the past 2 years, we've been talking about no new additional positions, no additional FTEs, just in order to maintain what we've built and what we've been able to create since the end of COVID. Because all that one-time money is over. We have no additional funding except for these competitive grants that we have been applying for. But what that has allowed us to do was new curriculum adoptions. So going back to my first slide, in order to keep those other 2 lines flat for contractual obligations and supplies and materials, we've had to do that by grants. So in order to maintain these programs, if we don't have that one-time funding, it then comes down to a conversation about positions and FTEs. So we want to be able to maintain class size. We want to be able to maintain all the positions that we've just collectively bargained for. But by doing that, we also need to make sure that we're still looking at grants or one-time funding from spending down the revolving accounts where it's appropriate in order to keep the contractual services line in line with just over 5% growth year over year. Now, that being said, for fiscal 26, we also have to look at going out to bid for transportation. Our contract with North Reading Transportation ends this June. So we'll be doing that. And we all know that transportation this year in Wakefield has been an issue. We're still just maintaining our bus routes. And that's also talking about start times. So we just need to make sure that we can afford all of these non-salary initiatives.
Thank you, Christine. Next slide, please. So challenges and beyond, just to summarize here, one of our priorities is continuing to work steadily year in, year out on school safety and improving in that area. And that includes cyber safety. ADA accessibility, not only for our buildings, but also for our playgrounds. The town and kind of Tim O'Brien have worked amazing in regard to capital. Almost all of our play structures have improved with ADA accessible surfaces. The work that was done at Doyle and Dennis Fazio was really fantastic in that space. But we do know we are in a space now where we're getting to a point where we need to make more dramatic increases in academic outcomes and social emotional learning outcomes for students. We've invested a lot in curriculum, and we have a lot of very positive things happening. And kind of one of our goals is just looking at really making gains in academic outcomes for students and SEL outcomes for students. We're looking at retaining, recruiting, and developing outstanding teachers. We have the highest retention rate in the Middlesex League. at 92.4%. I was just looking at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education website, and I thought I knew we were amongst the very top of the Middlesex League. I thought we had been displaced, but we were not displaced, and our ability to maintain staff has really helped support the success and gains that we've been able to make so far. We also need to look at a more comprehensive facilities plan. And I mentioned a moment ago, looking ahead. If it's taken us 10 years to get where we are, we need to start to think about when the new high school is coming online. Is it time to write an SOI, a statement of interest to the MSBA to renovate Greenwood Elementary? Because the school is not ADA accessible in a way that it needs to be, and we really need to kind of look ahead to the future there. Next slide, please. And so while we're talking about all of this, we need to continue to be aware and more transparent with the changing demographics and the needs of our students. I talked about ML students. Our economically disadvantaged students are also kind of something that has increased. We're at 17.2% of our students are categorized as economically disadvantaged. And that designation or the definition has changed. It has included some other variables, but it's still kind of an indicator that we need to pay attention to. And we're seeing it more and more as we're planning activities for students, and we're seeing greater need. And how we're going to meet that need is a question for us moving forward. Addressing the challenges of turning away 60 families is something that is real for us. When students start with us, the chances of them having an academic experience and acclimating more quickly to the Wakefield Public Schools increases proportionally. And so that's something that we are really looking at. Steve and I have discussed the need for a modular for therapy work at our preschool, as well as the need for more space. That's something that's real. I don't think it's our preschool needs and our preschool population needs are decreasing. I think that they are going to increase. We need to look at acceleration academies, and if those grants from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed are sunsetting, we need to think about the possibility of different funding sources. And we also need to look at extended day and extended year services for supporting students. We are obligated to provide extended year services to a number of students. Just on scale, our population in the last 5 years has gone from about 300 plus students in our extended year summer program. Now we're close to 600 students. And so that's something that we need to pay attention to, because those are costs that aren't always seen. And again, I've mentioned this a few times. The big question for us is, what do we need to do to plan for the next 10 years? It's taken us 10 years to get to this point where we have a new high school coming online. We're excited about that. We're excited about the community support for that. But we need to look ahead and be mindful of what else we need to do. And that's really it. Next slide, please. We wanted to close with, this is a rendering from our architects of what the new high school will look like. As you can see, the green space is amazing. The amount of student parking, off-street parking has increased with this design. And the good news at this point is, as steel is being erected, we anticipate having kind of the topping off ceremony, which is a big milestone in the erection of steel in the construction project. But that should happen around Christmas or a little before. We'll keep everyone up to date on that. And we could not be more pleased about this. The short update on this is that we are on schedule and on budget. And that is it from us. Happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Okay, why don't we move on? We can do questions at the end, maybe, because hopefully things will all tie together. Sherry, can you go to the next slide, and maybe Jim Sullivan, you want to talk about this a little bit?
Sure. So the budgeting best practices, obviously, multi-year forecasting, sustainability, being able to cover the costs as you prepare and understand how it's going to work this year, looking out in multiple years to understand if there are reserves, there are other opportunities there. Those are the kind of things that everybody needs to do in their budgeting process. Including benefits, when you look at total cost, charged to programs through revolving accounts or grants, other opportunities there across all departments that have any kind of revenue or charges against grant programs where benefits are or are not included. Excuse me. The financial policy, trying to adhere to that, the 10% of reserves for all of us to work towards that in all of our thinking when it comes to the long-term planning. Outside revenue sources, obviously, if they're available, how long are they available? Hiring people on short-term grants. If it's the right thing to do, how do we plan for that multi-years out? And then the state and local trends. The local trends look really good as described. The state trends we're doing okay, and they've slipped up a little bit. So, I mean, there's work to be done to try to ensure we can get the most available funds, for the right reasons and for the right priorities that the town has. Next slide. You want me to do this one, Steve, as well, right?
Yeah, yes, please do. I'll jump in if you.
Yep. The review, the contractual versus discretionary, you've heard that many times tonight, and you hear it through the subcommittees. There are definitely items that need to be prioritized, need to be understood, and money's accounted for. Discretionary spending is just how it sounds. It needs to have a really, really good reason. It needs to be well justified. Each program and line item, working with the department heads, subcommittee, the school committee is looking at it as well. And capital versus operational expenses. We've worked hard over the last, I don't know, 10 years to move operational expenses into the operational budgets and focus the capital spending as capital, large items that justify the term capital expenditures. The subcommittees, both finance subcommittee and the department heads and the schools financial subcommittee, taking a look at things and staying on top of the items and working through it together to understand it all, to be able to explain it, to justify it, and to fund it. And then obviously the trend analysis, not use it or lose it mentality. There's money that gets allocated. If something changes during the year and the money doesn't get used, department heads are encouraged to return the money, because it doesn't mean you're not going to get more or less next year. One has nothing to do with the other. You need to budget prudently, you need to spend prudently, and you need to return money, as it makes sense. Thank you.
A couple of things that we've been looking at as we had a forecasting meeting the other day. And one thing we're looking at for future years is health insurance. We have been very, very fortunate in how we've managed our health insurance budget. We've done a great job. Last year, we returned $1 million that was not spent for health insurance costs. I will tell you that what we're hearing out of the state, and we are lucky that a number members of FinCom are either in the health insurance industry, as on town council, or work in other communities, and we're hearing that it's going to be a tough year in health insurance costs, looking at 8 to 10% increases. That's something we're going to have to manage in fiscal year 26 when we take that on. Another one, and I know that's kind of silly, is trash removal costs are going up. We're we've done a great job reducing our load by more recycling and more composting and things like that. We're going to have to be even more vigilant, but the cost of trash removal is going up, and some of our neighbors who are entering into new contracts are getting a little bit of a sticker shock. So that's something we're working very carefully on. Net state aid, I talk about it ad nauseum. And I'm sure that our state delegation hates hearing me from it. I think they call me more money Mayo, and that's okay. As long as it's coming our way, I'm happy with that. I think some of the challenges that we've been looking at, particularly in the school department with the change in the population of more English language students and sadly, more economically disadvantaged students as a percentage, that's something we're gonna have to really hit home with our delegation to increase our Chapter 70 allotment under the formula. And I think that's something we'll work very closely with the school department on that and with our state delegation. We've talked about local receipts. They continue to look good. It's rebounded from from the pandemic area, and we're looking at increasing them. We're actually increasing them a little bit more than 4% a year because they're looking so good. And that's a positive for us. New growth remains steady, and looking in some of the bigger projects with Victor, our excellent assessor, we look for good numbers for those in the next few years. Energy efficiency is very exciting. Article 3 at the November town meeting, completely handles the energy needs of Galvin School from the rays of the sun. That's going to save about $100,000 a year in energy costs, which is fabulous. We'll pay off in about 4 years our cost on that project. And then after that, it's just adding to areas that make more sense in actual student learning and things like that. I know some people saying 4 to 5%. I'm surprised I didn't hit on this one. I ratcheted that down a little bit, or maybe Kevin got in and changed my slides overnight on that. Looking at really going to look very closely at the budgets over the next few years, and there are more federal opportunities than there used to be, and we are applying for a lot of federal funds that we're getting and in a lot of different areas. I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure funds available. We just got $1.4 million. Not that it's the town side, but it is because it's fixing the gas lines on Water Street. And we have another grant like that we're going to be going down in the Greenwood area of town, fixing, repairing the gas lines there. That lets us get that done, look at the other utilities and fix the roads and hopefully do it in a much more cost-effective manner. So we're looking at federal funds and hoping that they will still remain there for the near future. So when we pull all this together, you can go to the next slide. We look forward 9-10 years, and I'll turn it over to our forecaster extraordinaire, Dan Sherman, to talk about the next couple of slides. But these numbers look a little bit better than they did last year, and I think they'll even be more positive than they are here. But Dan, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I did compare this chart to what we had a year ago, and again in May and April when we were going through the 25 budget, and the numbers are a little bit better. We had a larger deficit. We were actually expected to run out of money in free cash in 2032. As you see in the next slide, we have enough free cash to cover these deficits until 2033, 2034. We had a large increase in costs in fiscal year 25 versus 24 at 5.55%. 26, it mitigated, obviously. We expected to come in about 4.2, but still the increase in income right now is at 403, so it does create a small deficit. And one of the things that is hitting our deficit we haven't talked about is we're going to get hit with another big increase in the Northeast Volk and their construction project. That's going to be, I've got right now about 15% increase in their budget, which is actually adding a couple of $100,000 more than what we expect. But over the long term, you can see where our expectation is if we can keep our budgets in the 3 to 4% range, we can maintain a roughly a 4% increase in costs and a 4% increase in income and do okay. Next slide, please. So what does it mean in terms of looking out into the future in terms of our funds and our reserves? So right now we're at 11.6 million in free cash. I do expect the free cash Some of it's going to get spent here in the fall town meeting, and more will be spent throughout the year. And it does look like free cash is going to drop down to about 8.5 million. I do include some additional funding going into stabilization. And we hope to put in some more in the next couple of years. We're not putting anything in this current year, but we'd like to get some more going in that to increase that to make sure we keep our 10% bogey. But the 8.5 million in 28 plus the 3.9, that comes in at 12.4 million, and will be less than 10% on our reserves at that point in time. So we will have to, make some changes. We're going to have to tighten things up someplace along the line if we want to avoid dropping down below our policy of 10%. It actually drops in 28 to 9.2% of our budget. So between now and 28, we got to figure some things out, increase some revenue, get some more aid, whatever it takes to get us there. But again, it is a better picture than we had a year ago at this time, and a better picture than we had at the spring town meeting. And I think that's it for me.
Okay, town meeting is Saturday, November 16th, where we'll talk about a lot of this. First item on the agenda will be my very pithy town report, where we'll talk about how we finished up fiscal year 24, which the departments did a great job, and that is will be available shortly if it isn't already online for people to look at. We will use free cash to balance the budget and still maintain our 10% reserves. As I mentioned, 3.8 million. And a lot of that has to do with how, we manage our funds with the Department of Revenue, manage our expectations with them, and then we know we're going to replenish at the end of the year. Galvin Solar Roof is a real exciting project. Where we're going to be able to, and again, taking advantage of some federal tax credits of 30% of the cost of the project, which is about $1 million. So about $300,000 coming back from the feds. That use of some ARPA funds and use of some free cash. This is going to have about a 4-year payback from us in saving energy costs in that school. Really very exciting, great foresight by the building committee at the time to make it pretty much solar ready. So I'm really excited about that, and I will have a lot more to say about that. Clerical contract is the last contract on the town side to get settled. That is consistent with the others. We'll use free cash and not much of about $54,000 to settle that. Water sewer supplement. The first quarter water bills for fiscal year 25, the year that we're in now, not a lot of water was used, which I guess is a real great thing from conservation standards. However, it really hurts us in managing the department because water bills is what pays, for all the water sewer costs in town. So it runs off the use of water. Second quarter looks much better and looks actually really good. But in order to set a tax rate, the Department of Revenue is going to want to see us supplement that budget with water sewer retained earnings, or their free cash, so to speak, in that revolving account, just in case usage doesn't smooth out over the year. But we'll expect to get that money back. But interestingly enough, if we don't do that, and we'll have more to say about it, we'll have trouble setting our tax rate and won't be able to collect any money. So that's because the DOR won't accept it. So that's an important item. MBTA communities, which is the big kahuna at this meeting. I think that the subcommittee has done a really good job to thread the needle and find a plan that is palatable, and that will be presented. There's going to be a number of more meetings and forums on this that will be out on the website, coffees and things like that. But it is an important issue for us to discuss and to move on at town meeting. And then we do have a couple of citizen petitions. So there's a total of 8 articles. Saturday, November 16th at 8 a.m. at the Galvin Middle School. And with that, I think, Chairman McLean, we can open it up to any questions or comments from panelists.
Sure. Should we have people raise their hands? They have any questions?
Probably would work best.
Yeah, that would help. Yeah. Ed has his hand raised.
Councilor Dombrowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you everyone for your presentations tonight. Much appreciated. I think this is a really important meeting. One thing that stands out to me is one of the slides was titled budgeting best practices. And I think that as a town, we have really fallen into this rut of just doing things the same way again and again. I think the best practice for budgeting is zero-based budgeting. Why is it that we're not pursuing with each of our departments that approach? You know, I hear like a goal would be level funding. And then I hear, you know, we're talking about maintaining 3 to 4% increases overall in budgets. But, you know, needs change within departments. We have staffing needs that change, you know, technology changes, efficiencies, you know, can be realized. Each of these departments is dynamic. And I feel like as long as I've been involved with budgeting, going back to FinCom, we've always kind of had this approach of, well, our starting point is where we were last year, and then we'll try to stick within 3 to 4% increases of that. And then we've done well. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. And I think when we're looking at some of these major expenditures, these capital projects, and we're looking at a $200 million high school, which the taxpayers haven't even felt the full impact of yet. And then we're talking about the Greenwood, as we should, you know, that building has been in disrepair for way too long. We're talking about the need for, you know, early childhood education, your pre-K, and how we accommodate those needs as the school department raised. So we have all of this going on at the same time, and the VOC, you know, that Mr. Sherman appropriately pointed out. So we have all this going on, and I just think that the kind of burden that is being placed upon the taxpayers is already too significant, and it's going to become that much heavier in the years to come. And we can project that out. Those are knowns. So unless and until we start to approach things differently, I think we're going to have a real problem with you know, sustainable budgeting. And you know, we always hear when departments come before us, you know, well, things get more expensive every year. I appreciate that, but I think that then creates an obligation for each department to be creative in the way that it's approaching its budgeting, to see, okay, where can we realize greater efficiencies? Where can we do things differently than we've done them? And I think if we're taking a zero-based budgeting approach, we're causing every department to have to justify, you know, why it is that dollar should be spent as it is. And I think that's an important exercise. It's not punitive, but it's meant to cause every department to not just dial it in, you know, with the same kind of, you know, baseline, you know, from last year. And if they come in at 2.9% or 3.1%, they're applauded for it. I don't think that's the way to do it. And we don't have the ability or the financial wherewithal of our taxpayers to support that kind of approach. So I'd really encourage everyone to think about fundamentally how we look at building budgets out, you know, for this upcoming fiscal year. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions, Sherry, or raised hands?
I don't see any.
Okay, then. I would just add one thing to what Steve had indicated relative to the solar project, since we're having a financial meeting here. The town will own this project, so the town will also own the renewable energy credits, the RECs or SRECs, if you want to call them, solar renewable energy credits. And those intangibles have a value as well. And I won't give you a final quote, but we expect a not insignificant contribution from Gas and Light to purchase those SRECs from the town. These are necessary for Gas and Light to meet its 2050 carbon neutral goals. And that's just one other element that I think is positive for from the town side on that project that I wanted to mention. Other than that, Steve, I'm hoping I don't have to do a roll call vote. Because
Absolutely not.
I am at the point, if we don't have any other raised hands, of adjourning the tri-board meeting at, from my watch, 7:21 PM. And I'd like to thank everyone for your contributions and your continued contributions to the town.
No, I
Are we
think you're
good
good.
to close, Sherry?
Yep, I think we are good to close.
Okay. And we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance.